Kathy. I'm so excited for the chance to talk with you today. I've really admired everything you've achieved as the founder of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. And now you've also had a really important new book come out. It's called Fatal to Fearless. Which touches on your journey through not just one, but two different cancer diagnoses, multiple myeloma and later breast cancer. I wanted to share that I really loved your book, and I think
Oh,
that anyone affected by a cancer diagnosis is going to find a lot of practical advice and tools in it to help them meet the challenges that they're facing. So, thank you so much for putting this book out into the world. And I wanted, I guess, to start with you note in your book how overwhelming it can be to be newly diagnosed with cancer. And that's something we certainly hear all the time from the Chordoma patients that we serve. So, the first thing I wanted to ask you is what are a couple of things that newly diagnosed patients can do to get a handle on these feelings of overwhelm? What would you tell them about where to start?
well, I think the most important thing you can do is learn everything you can. So, I always explain to everybody, everybody's journey is different. Just because you're reading information doesn't mean that that's going to be you. So the more you know about your specific cancer and how it should be treated and what the opportunities are for you, the better off you're going to be. And I think the second piece of, getting the journey right is also knowing who is the team around you. So once you build that team, I explain to people like you need a team that can help you logistically because who's taking care of the kids, who's getting you to the appointments. You need a team that can help take care of you emotionally. And you need somebody that can help you do the research because the research itself can be overwhelming. So building that team becomes really important. And not everybody has a huge team. So decide what it is that you feel like you need the most and ask for that. But the other part I always say to people is that they forget that there are resources available, like foundations like yours, or for me, running the MMRF. And I would always be surprised, like, why does every patient not find us? Like, I want every single one to find us because we know this disease better than anybody, just like you guys do. And it's so important for the patients to be able to talk to you and have all the resources that you offer too.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love what you say. You're sort of recommending that 360-degree approach of support around the patient and that there's different things that you're going to get from different people. And we certainly appreciate in the book, I mean, just as you mentioned, you emphasize that when a patient is Googling, you're going to get like pages of search results about your disease, depending, I suppose, on how common it is. And one of the things that you say to watch for is look for those patient organizations like the Chordoma Foundation, like the MMRF, and get that specialized knowledge and support. So, really appreciate you pointing out that in your book. Um, Kathy, you've had the experience now of being diagnosed with both a rare cancer and later a far more common one. And I'm wondering, does any of the guidance you offer in your book differ for people with a rare cancer, or what should patients who are facing a rare cancer do differently when navigating this experience?
I think when it's rare, it feels a little more isolating. Because it's really hard to find other people that are going through what you're going through. So I think it can feel a little bit more lonely. Certainly when I was diagnosed with myeloma, nobody had heard of it. It was 100% fatal. And, I was told I would live 3 years at best. That's hard to hear. And when you can't find anybody else that looks like you, myeloma skews older, male, and African American, it really gets tricky. So again, this is where I say work with the disease foundations because they can find you another person who's going through something similar. And I think that's what takes the isolation out of it, is knowing that somebody really cares about you. I think also when you get to centers where they see a lot of, chordoma patients or myeloma patients, that helps too, because you're often sitting in the waiting room and you're meeting people that are in the same situation as you. And just sometimes that hallway conversation can go a long, long way. I think the other part that is so important when the tumor is rare is the importance of collaboration across the centers. and everything that patients can possibly do to contribute to that collaboration and to make sure that they're part of the science is amazing. So for me, and you read about this in the book, being an identical twin, my sister and I were constantly raising our hands to say, take our bone marrow samples, for resus and take a look at our immune systems. And as a result of that, good science was had. So I feel like every patient with a rare tumor, whatever you can do to contribute to the science is really important.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. And we've been very fortunate at the Chordoma Foundation to have, a similarly strong patient community where everybody is willing to come to the table and do what they can. So yeah, very, very important. Thank you. Um, you are a strong advocate for patients getting a second or even a third opinion before they start cancer treatment. Why do you recommend this, and how could patients narrow down a decision if they get conflicting info from different doctors?
Yeah, this was a really interesting story and an important one in the book because what happened was I went to an internist. He suspected multiple myeloma and then sent me on to a hematologist oncologist. But you know how this runs. Like now you're with the hematologist oncologist, and it's never like it's black and white. Like you are this stage, and we know exactly what's going to happen to you. We're going to put you on these treatments. There's always all these gray areas. And so for me, they kept saying, well, some tests make you look like you're really far along. You're approaching stage 1 or 2. And others were like, no, you might be early, smoldering. And we really couldn't get a definitive answer. It turned out there were only like 4 to 6 centers working in myeloma. But one of them, the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, had a database on early stage patients. So I ended up going to the Mayo Clinic. So that's kind of how the path can take you, where you go from they suspect this to I get to a cancer center that actually knows something about chordoma, to then I've got to get to the right center that actually can focus on the type of surgery or whatever treatment I may need, and they see a high volume of those patients. I think that's the most important thing you can do is getting those first, second, third opinions as you move around, knowing more specifics about your disease. I also think the most important thing you can do is talk to your insurance company. Like my insurance company wasn't thrilled I was going to these centers, but I was basically saying to them, I don't understand the optimal treatment for me until I can actually see some of the information and specific data that the Mayo Clinic has. But I had to fight for it.
Yeah, that's really well put, very practical. And I think the what's difficult, I think, in that phase for people is the uncertainty around, it's confusing. And when you don't know what's next, I think that's very difficult emotionally. Was there anything that helped you from that like emotional, mental well-being standpoint when you were in that phase of just trying to figure out what was what?
That's where, again, the caregiving team comes in
Mhm.
because you've got to pick the right people. So for me, I was really lucky because, the hardest part of going from one center to another is logistics, money, sometimes you're traveling, all this. And my husband was phenomenal. Like he took me where I needed to go. He was in every appointment listening in. He took copious notes on everything. And so I was able to make my treatment decisions with him listening together. So that was a huge gift for me. The other person, though, that you read about in the book is my identical twin sister. And she was my emotional caregiver because I'm 37. I'm trying to be strong. I'm trying to think like, how do I want my husband to remember me because I'm going to be dead in 3 years? Like, how am I going to take care of this little girl? And there's so many things through my mind. And it was my sister I would call and be like, what the heck just happened to me? Like, how is this going on? And so she was my, talk me off the ledge person. You're a patient of one. We're going to get through this. I'm here for you. And I think that's what you need. And you have to thank those people around you that can do that for you and find them. It's so
Mhm.
critical. And I
Yeah,
do find
absolutely.
that like all the research is showing these days that because the science, thank God, is moving faster and it is becoming more and more complex, that when you talk to the caregivers, the biggest stress they have is the fact that they now, one of them at least, needs to know the science too. because they're
Mhm.
helping you make the decisions. So, your doctor, of course, is talking with you, but a lot of times the decision is they'll be, well, you could do this or you could do this. It's up to you. And you're thinking,
Mhm.
geez, it's up to me. Like,
Mhm.
so that's where the caregivers come in. And I think it's such an important role to play. And it
Okay.
keeps you, I don't know, when you have somebody to talk to about where you're headed, but you also have somebody to talk to that you can say, this stinks and I'm feeling down. Those two things are
Mhm.
both equally important.
Yeah, really, really important. Um, I guess on that topic of enlisting help from your support network, there's the emotional support, which we just talked about, but there's also like, who can help me figure out what I'm going to feed my family for dinner
Right.
tonight? Because I just cannot. And so it's clearly so important to be able to enlist this help from your network, the practical task related help. But it can also be really hard to ask. It's just sort of like, easier said than done to get all of this help from your village. And so I'm wondering, how do you recommend patients go about getting that type of support that they need from their people?
I found what I ended up doing was, first of all, I realized how kind people are and everybody wants to help, but I didn't have time to manage it at that point. So
Mhm.
I had one person that took this on for me and was amazing and basically said, I'm going to be the logistics leader for Kathy, especially when she goes to do her stem cell transplant and she'll be gone for a long time. And basically, she made sure that meals were delivered to our house every night for dinner. Like she made sure kids were picked up. So if you can have one person that is just a great organizer like that, then they take that on and they're only coordinating with you, which I think is amazing. So that's how I worked it out. I mean, other people may do it differently, but I just I couldn't have too many people that I was trying to
Mhm.
talk with. And at the same time, I might have these days where I was so sick that I wasn't the best contact person for them anymore.
Mhm.
And then, of course, like even when I was doing the transplant, I was doing things like carrying bridge. In today's world, anybody can set up any kind of social program they
Mhm.
want to really stay in touch with people. But I will say, during the toughest times of my treatment, just having carrying bridge and having somebody read that to me went a long way. It wasn't that I was worried about myself. I was just so happy that they were writing in that they had just seen one of my kids for a play date or they picked him up from school. And it just gives you a sense of normalcy, which is terrific.
Yeah, that's really sweet. And I think it's so smart to enlist almost like a program manager,
Yeah.
project manager for the care that you need. So that's really helpful tip. Um, Turning toward a different phase of the cancer patient journey, and something I think that a lot of people don't talk enough about sometimes is being prepared for life after treatment ends. So, maybe a patient is seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. They're about to ring that bell that signals the end of treatment. And maybe they have the expectation that they'll just be able to go back to normal, sort of pick up where they left off before they even heard the word cancer. But you talk about needing a plan for this stage, the stage where treatment ends and survivorship begins. Why do you think this is so important? And what are some things that people should be thinking about as they enter or try to adjust to the post treatment phase?
Yeah, what happens is when you're in the thick of treatment, it is, what I call in the book go time. I mean, and all you can think about is getting to the doctor's appointments, getting through the major treatment, surgery, transplants, whatever it's going to be. And you have like the complete tunnel vision. And then all of a sudden you're finished and your calendar is wide open and you're not back at work and you're not normal. And in all honesty, you're not going to be normal again for a really long time. And so part of it is the fact that at that point in time, patients feel really lost. And I did too. So all of a sudden I get home after being in isolation, up at Dana-Farber for nearly a month. And I'm so happy to be home. But my husband needs to go back to work and my children need to go back to school. And I don't know what I'm doing. So I realized I was depressed. I was really
Mhm.
depressed. And I called my sister who came up to, spend some time with me. And then I thought, I just really got to go see the doctor and talk to them about this. And then I realized over time when I was doing research on the book, that time after you finish treatment has the highest rate of depression. It's
Mhm.
not uncommon whether you're a breast cancer patient or a rare tumor patient, once you've finished all of that, to just feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing now? I think it's just this valley between I'm done the treatment, but I'm not strong enough to just start life, and life is not going to be as I knew it. And
Mhm.
so that's why I say it's another point in time. There's 2 points in time where I say you really have to sit down and write. And I don't mean, write 26 journals like I did for my kids. I mean, when you first get diagnosed, it is an amazing time, especially when you're told that your tumor is tough and that, there's a possible fatality. It is an important time to sit down and say, oh my God, what are my regrets? Like, what am I upset about right now? And to use that as your North Star as you move forward, because it really does affect where you want to go with your plan. For me, as you read in the book, I really wanted to have another child. I had grown up with an identical twin. I wanted my daughter Nicole to have a sibling, and that became my North Star, was having, a bigger family and making sure they were safe. But you've really got to focus on that in the beginning. Then you've got to look at it again. Now you're through the treatment and you've got to sit back. And this is where I think I lost my North Star, because I I should like it. I'm reading it back. I think I probably should have stayed home. I don't know that I had to go back and run the MMRF all over again. But the reason I did was because I was petrified of relapse. And in myeloma, it always comes back. And I just felt like, okay, well, I found some really great drugs for all of us for first and second round treatments, but we need to find more. And I was back on the road and racing to every medical meeting. And I feel like I missed a lot. Teenage years for kids are tough. And I feel like I missed things when I went back and read the journal. So that's why I say know the North Star. I did adjust. I definitely did adjust once I realized a bit of what was going on, but I think I could have adjusted even more. So know the North
Mhm.
Star, go back and look at it, revisit it again after you finish treatment, because you may have decided something different, and it's okay, but write it down and put it someplace safe.
Yeah, I like that advice. And Kathy, one of the things that I appreciated about your book is how open and honest you were about just how difficult it is to balance the responsibilities of family while running a foundation. You feel this responsibility to the people in your home, but you also feel responsibility to this whole community of patients and families. And I think you've done a remarkable job of balancing them all. And I just appreciate you being so honest about what that takes.
Oh, thank you. I do. I feel like I love every patient out there, because at the end of the day, we're trying to save our lives and we're trying to live them at the same time. And yet, a cancer diagnosis is like adding another full-time job on top of taking care of your family, taking care of your income, and it's tough. And so that's why in the book I'm trying to explain to everybody, like, if it feels tough, it's not you. It's the system
Right.
is a challenge. It's not you.
Yep, exactly. I guess this is a pretty similar topic to what we're talking about. I was just amazed in the book. You talk about you were relatively early in your experience with this disease. And, you're facing this diagnosis, the questions that it comes with. Then you add to that a cross-country move, job changes for you and your husband. I think at this point in the book, you had a newborn and a toddler. And that's when you decided, oh, I think I'm going to add to my plate. I'm going to start raising money from friends and family for multiple myeloma research. And that, of course, eventually led you to launch MFRF, which has made such tremendous strides against that disease over the years. But I guess I'm curious, when you look to the very beginning, the origin of that, what motivated you to take on fundraising for research in the midst of everything else going on at that point?
It's such a great question, because you know what? In order to start a foundation, like I started the MMR because my friends, I was working at Searle, which became part of Pfizer, so the pharmaceutical company, and they were doing a United Way campaign, and everybody said, we'd rather donate to help Kathy, because they just heard that this disease was fatal. So they wanted to put a fund together under the United Way umbrella. And that's how it got started. It was a community fund, just started with all my friends at that company and agencies that were supporting us. And so now all of a sudden we have a community fund, but then we started doing events, and all of a sudden now they tell you that you need to be a 501(c)(3). And I was like, oh, I don't want to do all that, because I've got a job and kids and all this other stuff. But I did it. because I thought if I did, it might allow me to see Nicole to kindergarten. And if I could see her till she was 5, that was doing a lot better than the 3 years. And now, of course, David had been born, and whatever time I could buy for him to remember me was going to be worth it. So I decided to take it on. But I will tell you, and I think you get a sense for this in the book, the hardest part of running a foundation, a patient-oriented foundation, for me was not writing the strategic plan or getting the programming done. I loved it. And I think my background in the pharmaceutical industry really helped me there. It was the fundraising. It was the hardest part by far. I was hugely fortunate in that our friends from Harvard Business School, between my husband and myself, that was our first database. And within that database, I got my first $1 million donation. So
Um,
that's not what every foundation gets. I was really, really fortunate that way. And I'll always be grateful to that person that got me from a desk in my bedroom to an actual office in town. Um, but what happened with the fundraising was because we wrote really strong strategic plans, looking for that white space. And I think you guys do this beautifully too. Like, what is the community doing? What is FDA doing? What is pharma doing? What's biotech doing? What are the academic centers doing? And where's the white space that we can play as an organization? If you can do that well and explain to your donors and patients and families why you're in that space, I found it pretty easy to raise the money that we needed because I was so passionate about it. And I think they also trusted me as a patient that I was not going to waste a penny and that I shared their urgency. So, what started as, oh, let me live long enough to see Nicole to kindergarten became, oh my gosh, we've written really good plans, we've raised the money, and this is actually working. And all of a sudden, like 3, 4, 5 years into it, I'm thinking we're now having more and more drugs. And so fast forward, myeloma's had 15 drugs approved. We've been fortunate. FDA has been great. It turns out immunotherapy is also working in myeloma. Targeted therapies have. So we've been fortunate that
wow.
way. But yeah, you just keep going. I mean, the disease is still fatal. I mean, we live a
Mhm.
lot longer, but it is still considered a fatal disease. So our work is not yet done.
Yeah. Well, you all have done such an incredible job, and you've raised now $500 million. Is
Yeah, so I
that
think it's
right?
up to
Wow.
600 million, which is I think it's the
Um,
toughest part of the job. I really do.
It's amazing. What I think one thing it seems, I was looking at your website prior to this call, and something that it seems like your community does really well is, your organization is raising funds, but so are members of your patient community. So through bike rides and walks and runs and virtual fundraisers, and that's something that's made just such an outsized impact in our community as well. And so I think this is actually a perfect segue to my last question for you, Kathy. This is something I found so inspiring in your book. So early in your journey with your foundation, you gave something of a rallying cry in a speech at a research workshop saying, every patient has their eyes on the future. It's how we get out of bed each morning and put our feet on the floor. If we all work together, if we work quickly, we can turn our hopes into reality. Time is of the essence. And I just thought that was so powerful and wanted to end on this question, which is, what do you want rare cancer patients to know about their role in creating progress and hope against their diseases?
Well, first, I want them to know they're not alone. Secondly, I want them to know that myeloma is considered a rare tumor and progress does happen, especially when you have great organizations like yours working on it. And I think the MMRF is a great model. You guys are a great model too, so that there is always hope. And at 3 is you have to generate a critical mass of everything you do. When it's a rare tumor, centers have to work together, biotechs have to work together. Everybody has to be in full sync. You can't go to one center and they have all the answers. Like in breast cancer, that might happen. In the common tumors, it can happen. The ability to collaborate and integrate in rare tumors is astounding. And so, whatever the patients can do to have a rallying cry themselves to make sure everybody's working together and make sure, like we said earlier, they're offering their tissue and their data, it's critical. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kathy, thank you so much. We really hope that people check out your book. Again, it's called
Thank you.
Fatal to Fearless. It's just packed with wise and practical advice for patients and caregivers. And I really think it's going to help a lot of people feel less alone and more prepared for their journey.
I hope so. Sarah, thank you. It was really fun. It's always good to see you guys.